The rain hammered against the windshield of the 18-wheeler like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Marcus Thompson squinted through the blur, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 23 years navigating America's highways. The wipers slapped back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, barely keeping pace with the downpour that had descended upon this stretch of Interstate 40 somewhere between Amarillo and Oklahoma City. It was nearly midnight, and the truck stop at exit 147 appeared through the curtain of rain like a beacon in the darkness. Marcus eased his foot off the accelerator, feeling the weight of 40,000 pounds of freight behind him as the truck began to slow. His back ached from 8 hours of continuous driving, and his eyes burned with the fatigue that came from staring at wet pavement and taillights for too long. The parking lot was nearly empty when he pulled in, just a handful of other rigs scattered across the rain-slicked asphalt like sleeping giants. Marcus maneuvered his truck into a spot near the back, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. The rain continued its assault on the roof of the cab, creating a cocoon of white noise that made the outside world seem very far away. He was 54 years old, and nights like this made him feel every one of those years. His wife, Linda, had passed 3 years ago from cancer, and since then the road had become both his refuge and his prison. Their daughter Sarah lived in Denver with her husband and their 2 kids, and Marcus saw them maybe twice a year if he was lucky. The truck cab had become his home, these anonymous truck stops his temporary neighborhoods, and the other drivers who passed through his only community. Marcus grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat and pushed open the door, stepping down into the rain. He jogged toward the entrance of the travel center, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs advertising diesel fuel prices and hot coffee. The automatic doors slid open, welcoming him with a blast of warm air and the smell of burned coffee and fried food. The place was typical of 1,000 others he had visited over the years. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a slightly green tint. Racks of snacks lined one wall, while the other held an assortment of trucking supplies and cheap souvenirs. A tired-looking woman in her 60s manned the register, her eyes glazed with the boredom of the graveyard shift. Marcus nodded to her as he passed, heading toward the small restaurant area at the back. He needed coffee and maybe a sandwich, something to keep him going until he could find a proper place to sleep for a few hours. The restaurant consisted of a dozen booths with cracked vinyl seats and a counter with spinning stools that had probably been installed sometime in the 1970s. He slid into a booth near the window where he could keep an eye on his truck through the rain-streaked glass. A waitress appeared almost immediately, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes and a name tag that read Destiny in faded letters. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, pulling a pencil from behind her ear. "Coffee, black, and a turkey sandwich if you've got one." "Coming right up." She disappeared behind the counter, and Marcus turned his attention to the window. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and he found himself wondering if he should just sleep here in the parking lot rather than try to push on to Oklahoma City. He was ahead of schedule anyway, and there was no point in risking an accident just to shave a few hours off his delivery time. The coffee arrived first, steaming and bitter, exactly what he needed. Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He was about to take his first sip when movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. A boy had entered the restaurant. He looked to be maybe 12 or 13, with shaggy brown hair that was plastered to his forehead from the rain. His clothes were soaked through, a thin hoodie that had probably once been blue but was now grey with dirt and wear, jeans that were at least 2 sizes too big, and sneakers that had seen better days. The boy hesitated in the doorway, his eyes darting around the room like a frightened animal assessing potential threats. Marcus watched as the boy made his way to a booth on the opposite side of the restaurant, sliding in with his back to the wall. He kept his head down, but his eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning the room. The waitress approached him, and Marcus could see the boy shake his head, not ordering anything. Destiny frowned but moved on, apparently too tired to push the issue. Something about the kid bothered Marcus. It was past midnight on a Tuesday, in the middle of nowhere, and here was this boy who looked like he had been walking in the rain for hours. Where were his parents? Why was he alone? Marcus tried to mind his own business. God knew he had enough of his own problems without taking on someone else's. But something in the way the boy kept looking toward the door, the way he hunched his shoulders like he was trying to make himself smaller, wouldn't let Marcus look away. His sandwich arrived, but Marcus found he had lost his appetite. He picked at the bread, his attention still fixed on the boy across the room. The kid had pulled his hood up over his wet hair and was staring at the table, his hands hidden in the sleeves of his sweatshirt. Every few seconds he would glance toward the door, and Marcus could see the fear in his eyes, even from this distance. 20 minutes passed. Marcus finished his coffee and ordered another. The boy hadn't moved, hadn't ordered anything, hadn't spoken to anyone. The waitress had tried approaching him one more time, and again he had shaken his head, mumbling something that Marcus couldn't hear. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the few other patrons in the restaurant came and went, paying no attention to the solitary figure in the corner booth. Marcus knew he should leave. He had no business getting involved in whatever situation this kid was in. For all he knew, the boy was just waiting for his parents to finish fueling up their car. Maybe he'd had a fight with his family and was sulking. There were 100 innocent explanations for why a kid might be sitting alone in a truck stop at midnight, but something in Marcus's gut told him otherwise. He finished his second coffee, left a 20 on the table, and stood up. Instead of heading for the door, he walked toward the boy's booth. The kid saw him coming and tensed, his eyes widening with something that looked like panic. "Easy," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." The boy didn't respond. Up close, Marcus could see that he was younger than he had initially thought, maybe 11 or 12 at the most. His face was thin, almost gaunt, with cheekbones that stood out too prominently and dark circles under his eyes that rivaled the waitress's. There was a bruise on his left cheek, faded to yellow but still visible. "My name's Marcus," he said, sliding into the booth across from the boy. He kept his hands on the table where the kid could see them. "I'm a truck driver. My rig's parked outside. What's your name?" The boy remained silent, his eyes fixed on Marcus's hands as if expecting them to suddenly become weapons. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," Marcus continued, "but I've been watching you for a while, and I can tell something's wrong. You're wet and cold, and you haven't ordered anything. Are you hungry?" Something flickered in the boy's eyes at the word hungry, a brief moment of vulnerability that he quickly tried to hide. "I can get you some food," Marcus offered. "No strings attached. I just want to help." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper, rough and suspicious. "Because you remind me of someone," Marcus said honestly. "Someone I failed a long time ago, and because no kid should be sitting alone in a place like this in the middle of the night." The boy studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could almost see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. Trust warred with fear, hunger with suspicion. Finally, something seemed to break, and the boy's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "That's good advice. Your parents teach you that?" The boy's face hardened. "I don't have parents." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was different. He took a breath, choosing his next words carefully. "Where are you headed?" "Away." "Away from what?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he reached up to push his wet hair out of his eyes, and as he did, the sleeve of his hoodie slipped back. Marcus saw it then, and everything inside him went cold. The boy's forearm was covered in marks. Some were old, faded to white scars that crisscrossed his skin like a road map of pain. Others were newer, still red and angry, the skin around them inflamed. But the worst were the ones that looked freshest, barely healed, clearly made by something other than the boy's own hand. They were too regular, too deliberate, and Marcus recognized them for what they were: burns, circular burns, the size and shape of cigarettes. The boy realized what Marcus was looking at and yanked his sleeve down, but it was too late. Their eyes met, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them that needed no words. "Who did that to you?" Marcus asked, his voice harder than he intended. The boy looked away, his jaw tight. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Why? You don't know me." "No," Marcus agreed, "I don't. But I know what those marks mean. And I know that whoever put them there doesn't deserve to be protected." The boy was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "His name is Carl. He's my foster father." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists beneath the table. He forced himself to relax, to keep his expression calm. The last thing this kid needed was to see another adult lose control. "How long?" he asked. 2 years, since I was 10. "And the burns?" The boy shrugged, a gesture that was heartbreakingly casual. "Whenever he gets drunk, which is most nights." Marcus closed his eyes, fighting down the rage that was building in his chest. He had seen a lot of things in his years on the road. He had witnessed accidents that had left him with nightmares for months, had helped pull bodies from wrecked cars, had seen the worst that humanity had to offer on these dark highways. But this, a child being tortured in the place that was supposed to be his home, this was something else entirely. "What's your name?" he asked again, opening his eyes. The boy hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Ethan. Ethan Carter." "Okay, Ethan. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Are you running away?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Do you have anywhere to go? Family? Friends?" "No, there's nobody." "So where were you planning to go?" Ethan shrugged again. "Anywhere, away from here. I figured I'd find somewhere." Marcus ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble that had accumulated over the past few days. He thought about what he should do, what the right course of action was. He should probably call the police. That was the responsible thing, the thing any law-abiding citizen would do. But he had seen enough to know how the system worked. Ethan would be taken into custody, questioned, and then, more likely than not, returned to another foster home that might be just as bad as the one he had fled. The system was broken, and this kid had already fallen through its cracks. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked. Ethan thought about it. "Yesterday, I think. Maybe the day before." "Stay here." Marcus got up and walked to the counter, where Destiny was leaning against the register, scrolling through her phone. "I need another sandwich," he said. "Turkey, like mine. And a bowl of soup if you have it. Something hot and a glass of milk." "Sure thing, hun." While she went to prepare the order, Marcus stood at the counter and tried to figure out what the hell he was going to do. He couldn't just leave this kid here, but he couldn't exactly take him along either. Trucking companies had strict policies about passengers, especially minors. If anyone found out he was traveling with a child who wasn't his own, he could lose his job, his license, everything. But then again, what was all of that worth compared to a child's life? The food came, and Marcus carried it back to the booth. Ethan's eyes went wide when he saw the spread, and despite his obvious effort to appear nonchalant, he couldn't hide the hunger that consumed him. He ate quickly, barely pausing to breathe, and Marcus had to tell him to slow down twice so he wouldn't make himself sick. While Ethan ate, Marcus made a decision. It wasn't the smart choice. It wasn't the legal choice, But it was the right choice, and that was all that mattered. "Listen to me," he said when Ethan had finished the sandwich and was working on the soup. "I have a daughter. She's 32 now, has kids of her own. But when she was about your age, she had a friend. A girl named Michelle. Michelle's home situation was a lot like yours. She used to come to our house covered in bruises, making up stories about how clumsy she was. We all knew the truth, but nobody did anything. Not her teachers, not the neighbors, not even my wife and I. We told ourselves it wasn't our place, that someone else would handle it. Then one night, Michelle didn't show up at school. Turned out her stepfather had gone too far. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and when she got out, she went into the foster system. I never saw her again." Marcus paused, the memory still painful after all these years. "I've thought about Michelle a lot over the years. Wondered what would have happened if I had done something instead of nothing. If I had taken a risk instead of playing it safe. I made a promise to myself that if I ever had the chance again, I wouldn't make the same mistake." He looked at Ethan directly. "I'm not going to leave you here. I've got a delivery to make in Oklahoma City, and after that I'm heading to Denver. My daughter lives there. She and her husband are good people, and they have room in their house. I can't promise anything, but I can promise that whatever happens, you won't have to go back to Carl." Ethan stared at him, and Marcus could see the war playing out on his face. Hope and fear, trust and suspicion, the desperate need to believe, warring with a lifetime of disappointment. "Why would you do that?" Ethan asked. "You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." "Could be," Marcus agreed, "but you're not." "How do you know?" "Because I've been driving these roads for 23 years, and I've learned to read people. It's a survival skill in this job. And when I look at you, I see a kid who's been hurt, who's scared, and who's trying to survive the only way he knows how. I see a kid who deserves a chance." Ethan looked down at his empty soup bowl, and when he looked up again, there were tears in his eyes that he was clearly fighting to hold back. "I don't know how to trust people anymore," he said quietly. "That's okay," Marcus replied. "Trust is earned, not given. I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to earn it." For a long moment, Ethan was silent. The rain continued to pound against the windows, and somewhere in the restaurant, someone dropped a plate with a crash. Then, slowly, Ethan nodded. "Okay." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even known he was carrying. He pulled out his wallet and left another 20 on the table, then stood up. "Come on, let's get you dried off and somewhere warm. My truck's got a sleeper cab. You can get some rest while I figure out our next move." They walked out into the rain together, and Marcus found himself putting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The boy flinched at first, but didn't pull away. They crossed the parking lot to where Marcus's truck sat waiting, its chrome details gleaming in the rain. Marcus unlocked the cab and helped Ethan climb up into the passenger seat. The boy looked around with wide eyes, taking in the cramped but comfortable interior of the truck. "There's a bed in the back," Marcus said, pointing to the curtain that separated the driving area from the sleeper cab. "It's small, but it's warm and dry. There should be some spare clothes in the duffel bag under the bed. They'll be too big for you, but they're clean and dry." Ethan nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I mean it. Thank you." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as Ethan slipped through the curtain into the sleeper cab, then turned to stare out at the rain. What had he done? He had just taken on responsibility for a child he barely knew, had committed what could technically be considered kidnapping in some states, and had potentially put his entire career and future at risk. Linda would have said he was crazy. She would have pointed out all the reasons this was a terrible idea, all the ways it could go wrong. But then, Linda had always had a soft spot for strays, too. It was one of the things he had loved most about her. Marcus climbed up into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, its familiar vibration settling into his bones. He would drive through the night, get to Oklahoma City by morning, make his delivery, and then figure out what came next. Behind him, through the curtain, he heard Ethan moving around, and then silence. The boy was probably asleep already, exhausted from whatever ordeal had brought him to that truck stop in the middle of nowhere. Marcus put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. The rain still falling, but somehow not seeming quite as dark as it had before. The morning came grey and wet, the rain having finally stopped, but leaving behind a world that seemed washed clean and uncertain. Marcus pulled into the delivery dock at the Oklahoma City Distribution Center just after 8, his eyes gritty from the overnight drive. He had slept in fits and starts at a rest area, unable to fully relax, knowing there was a child in his truck who was counting on him. Ethan was still asleep when Marcus backed the trailer into the loading bay. He let the boy rest while he handled the paperwork, making small talk with the dock workers and trying to act like everything was normal. Inside, his mind was racing, trying to figure out his next move. He couldn't just show up at Sarah's house with a runaway foster kid. That would raise too many questions, and Sarah had her own family to think about. He needed to do this right, which meant involving the proper authorities at some point, but he had to make sure Ethan would be safe, that he wouldn't just be thrown back into the system that had failed him so spectacularly. When the unloading was finished, Marcus climbed back into the cab to find Ethan awake, sitting in the passenger seat and watching the activity outside with wary eyes. "Hey," Marcus said, settling into the driver's seat. "How'd you sleep?" Ethan shrugged. "Okay, I guess. Better than I have in a while." "Hungry?" A nod. Marcus drove them to a diner a few blocks from the distribution center, a place he had eaten at before when passing through Oklahoma City. It was the kind of establishment that hadn't changed in decades, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that probably hadn't worked since the Reagan administration. They slid into a booth by the window, and Marcus watched as Ethan studied the menu with intense concentration. The boy had cleaned up a bit, using the clothes Marcus had offered and washing his face with water from a bottle. He still looked too thin, too tired, but there was something different about him this morning. A lightness that hadn't been there the night before. A waitress came by, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Dorothy. "What can I get you, boys?" Marcus ordered eggs, bacon, and toast. Ethan hesitated, looking at Marcus uncertainly. "Order whatever you want," Marcus said. "I'm buying." Ethan ordered pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, and orange juice. The waitress raised an eyebrow but wrote it all down without comment. When she walked away, Marcus found himself smiling. "That's quite an appetite." Ethan ducked his head, embarrassed. "Sorry, I can pay you back someday. I'll get a job when I'm old enough, and I'll pay back everything you've spent on me." "Kid, don't worry about it. I've been eating at truck stops for 23 years. I've got money saved up. A few meals isn't going to break me." They sat in silence for a while, watching the other patrons come and go. The diner was moderately busy, filled with the morning crowd of office workers grabbing breakfast before heading to their jobs and construction crews fueling up for a day of physical labor. "I need to ask you some questions," Marcus said finally, "and I need you to be honest with me." Ethan tensed slightly but nodded. "When you ran away, did you leave any indication of where you were going?" "No, I just left in the middle of the night. Carl was passed out drunk, and I just walked out." "How long have you been on the road?" 3 days. I hitched rides when I could, walked when I couldn't." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the thought of this kid hitchhiking alone. The dangers he must have faced, the risks he had taken, all to escape a situation that should never have existed in the first place. "Has anyone reported you missing?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. Carl might have. He gets money from the state for being my foster parent. He'd notice when the checks stopped coming." The bitterness in Ethan's voice was palpable, and Marcus couldn't blame him. to be reduced to nothing more than a source of income for someone who was supposed to be caring for you, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind. "We're going to have to involve the authorities at some point," Marcus said carefully. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. I can't just adopt you or become your legal guardian without going through the proper channels." Fear flickered across Ethan's face. "They'll send me back, or they'll put me in another home just like Carl's. Not if I can help it. I know some people. My daughter and her husband, they've been talking about fostering for a while now. They're good people, Ethan, really good people, and I'm not going to let you disappear into the system again." "You can't promise that." "No," Marcus admitted. "I can't. The system is broken, and sometimes good people get lost in it. But I can promise that I'll fight for you, that I won't abandon you, that whatever happens, you won't be alone." The food arrived then. Plates of steaming eggs and crispy bacon. A towering stack of pancakes for Ethan that made his eyes go wide. They ate in silence for a while, the serious conversation temporarily set aside in favor of sustenance. Marcus watched Ethan eat, noting how the boy savored each bite like he wasn't sure when his next meal would come. It was a habit born of uncertainty, of never knowing if there would be food on the table, or if Carl would spend the grocery money on beer instead. It was a habit that would take a long time to break. When they had finished eating, Marcus paid the bill, and they walked back to the truck. The morning had grown warmer, the sun finally breaking through the clouds and casting long shadows across the parking lot. "Denver's about 8 hours from here," Marcus said as they climbed into the cab. "We'll get there by evening if we make good time." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "Dad? Hey, Sarah. Is everything okay? You never called during the day." Marcus glanced at Ethan, who was watching him with those wary eyes. "Everything's fine. Listen, I'm going to be in Denver tonight. I was wondering if I could stop by, maybe stay for a few days." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus could imagine his daughter's face, the way her brow furrowed when she was thinking, "Of course you can. You know you're always welcome. But what's going on, Dad? Is this about the anniversary?" Marcus blinked. The anniversary. 3 years since Linda had passed. He had been so focused on Ethan that he had almost forgotten. "Partly," he said, "but there's something else I need to talk to you about. Something I can't explain over the phone. You're scaring me." "Don't be scared. It's not bad, just complicated. I'll explain everything when I get there." "Okay, we'll have dinner ready. Josh and I are both working from home today, so we'll be here." "Thanks, sweetheart. See you tonight." He hung up the phone and put the truck in gear. Ethan was still watching him, a question in his eyes. "My daughter," Marcus explained. "She and her husband live in Denver. Like I said, they're good people. She's going to want to help. What if she doesn't want me there?" Marcus shook his head. "Sarah's got the biggest heart of anyone I know. She took that from her mother. When she hears your story, she's going to want to do everything in her power to make things right." They pulled onto the highway, the truck settling into the familiar rhythm of the road. For a while, neither of them spoke. Marcus focused on the driving, navigating through the traffic of the Oklahoma City suburbs before hitting the open highway that would take them north through Kansas and into Colorado. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after about an hour. "Sure. You said I reminded you of someone you failed. Who was that?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share. In the end, he decided on the truth. Ethan had been lied to enough. "My brother," he said. "Danny. He was 5 years younger than me. When I was 18, I left home to join the army. Danny was 13, and things at home weren't good. Our dad was a lot like your Carl, I think. He drank too much and took his frustrations out on us." Marcus paused, the old memories stirring up feelings he had spent decades trying to bury. "I knew when I left that Danny would bear the brunt of it. I told myself I had no choice, that I had to get out, that I'd come back for him when I was established. But I didn't. I got stationed overseas, met Linda, started a new life. I'd send money home, call when I could, but it wasn't enough. Danny died when he was 17. They said it was an accident, but I knew better. Ethan was silent, processing this information. I've carried that guilt with me for 36 years, Marcus continued. Every time I see a kid in trouble, I see Danny's face. I see all the ways I could have done things differently. I can't change what happened to him, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you. I'm sorry about your brother. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. Me too. But talking about it helps. I didn't talk about it for years, thought I could just bury it and move on. Took me a long time to learn that some wounds need air to heal. They drove on through the flat expanse of Kansas, the landscape giving way to fields of wheat and corn that stretched to the horizon. Ethan fell asleep somewhere around Wichita, his head lolling against the window. Marcus let him rest, grateful for the silence and the time to think. By the time they crossed into Colorado, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains in the west. The landscape had changed, the flat farmland giving way to rolling hills and then to the foothills of the Rockies. Marcus felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders as the familiar scenery passed by. Denver had always felt like home, even though he had spent more time on the road than in any one place. He woke Ethan as they approached the city, watching as the boy blinked awake and took in the view of the mountains rising in the distance. "That's where we're going?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with sleep. "That's it. Sarah lives in a suburb just south of the city. Nice neighborhood, good schools. Her kids are probably around your age, maybe a little younger." Ethan was quiet, and Marcus could see the fear creeping back into his eyes. "What if they don't like me? They'll love you. Kids are better at accepting people than adults sometimes. And my grandkids, Emma and Jake, they're good kids. You'll fit right in." They pulled off the highway and navigated through tree-lined streets that grew progressively more residential. The houses here were comfortable, well-maintained, with front yards that displayed the care of people who had the time and resources to tend them. It was a world away from the truck stops and highways that had defined Marcus's life for the past 2 decades. Sarah's house was a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. There was a minivan in the driveway and a basketball hoop mounted above the garage door. As Marcus pulled the truck to a stop at the curb, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her early 30s, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, and her face bore an expression of mingled joy and concern. "That's Sarah," Marcus said, cutting the engine. "She looks just like her mother, doesn't she?" Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the house, at Sarah, at the normal, stable life that was so different from anything he had known. Marcus could only imagine what was going through his mind. "Come on," Marcus said gently. "Let's go inside." They climbed down from the cab, and Sarah came down the porch steps to meet them. She hugged her father tightly, then turned to look at Ethan with curious eyes. "Dad, who is this?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Sarah, this is Ethan. He's why I called. Can we come inside?" "It's a long story." Sarah looked from her father to Ethan and back again. Something in her expression softened, some maternal instinct recognizing a child in need. "Of course," she said. "Come in. I just made coffee." They followed her into the house, Ethan hanging back slightly, his eyes darting around as he took in the surroundings. The interior was warm and welcoming, filled with family photos and comfortable furniture. A man appeared from the kitchen, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Marcus, good to see you. I'm Josh," he added, extending his hand to Ethan. "You must be hungry. There's dinner on the stove." Ethan shook his hand hesitantly, and Marcus saw some of the tension drain from the boy's shoulders. Josh had that effect on people. He was the kind of man who put others at ease without even trying. They sat down in the living room, and Marcus told the story. He started with the truck stop, with the rain and the boy sitting alone in the corner booth. He told them about the marks on Ethan's arms, about Carl and the foster system that had failed so completely. Sarah's eyes grew wet as he spoke, and Josh's jaw tightened with barely suppressed anger. When Marcus finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah stood up and walked over to where Ethan was sitting. She knelt down in front of him, putting herself at his eye level. "Ethan," she said softly, "I can't imagine what you've been through, but I want you to know that you're safe here. We're not going to let anyone hurt you again." Ethan looked at her, and Marcus saw something crack in the boy's carefully constructed defenses. His eyes filled with tears that he had probably been holding back for years. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why are you all being so nice to me?" Sarah reached out and took his hand. "Because that's what people are supposed to do. Take care of each other. I'm just sorry it took so long for you to find someone who understood that." Ethan broke then, the tears coming in earnest. Sarah pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as he sobbed against her shoulder. Marcus looked away, his own eyes stinging, and found Josh watching him with a mixture of respect and understanding. "We'll figure this out," Josh said quietly. "Whatever it takes." And in that moment, Marcus believed him. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Josh, who worked as an attorney, began making phone calls to contacts in the child welfare system. Sarah took on the role of caretaker, making sure Ethan was fed and clothed and had everything he needed. The children, Emma and Jake, accepted him with the easy grace of youth, inviting him to play video games and showing him around the neighborhood. Marcus watched it all unfold with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had done the right thing, he was sure of that now, but the road ahead was long and uncertain, filled with legal hurdles and bureaucratic obstacles that would need to be overcome. On the third day, Josh sat them all down in the living room with news. "I talked to a friend in the Department of Human Services," he said. "Carl has been notified that Ethan won't be returning to his care. There's going to be an investigation into the abuse allegations." Ethan tensed at the mention of Carl's name, and Sarah moved closer to him on the couch. "What about Ethan?" Marcus asked. "What happens to him now?" "That's the complicated part. Technically, he's still a ward of the state. But my friend was able to expedite some paperwork. If you're willing, Sarah and I can become his temporary foster parents while the investigation proceeds. It's not a permanent solution, but it keeps him out of the system and gives us time to figure out the next steps." Marcus looked at his daughter. "You're sure about this? It's a big responsibility." Sarah smiled, and for a moment, Marcus saw Linda's face superimposed over hers. "Dad, you taught me that some things are more important than convenience. Ethan needs a home, and we have one to offer. It's not even a question." Ethan was staring at them all, his expression one of disbelief. "You would do that? Take me in? You don't even know me." "We're getting to know you," Josh said. "And what we've learned so far, we like. You're a good kid, Ethan. You've just had some bad breaks. We'd like the chance to change that." For the first time since Marcus had met him, Ethan smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and uncertain, but it was real. It was the smile of a boy who was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might actually get better. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for decades. Danny's face flickered through his mind, and for once the memory didn't bring only pain. It brought a sense of purpose, of completion. He hadn't been able to save his brother, but he had saved Ethan. It didn't erase the past, but it helped balance the scales. "I should probably get back on the road," Marcus said reluctantly. "I've got another load waiting in Tulsa." Ethan's face fell. "You're leaving?" Marcus walked over to the boy and put a hand on his shoulder. "I've got to earn a living, kid, but I'll be back, often, and in the meantime, you've got Sarah and Josh and Emma and Jake. You're part of this family now. That doesn't end just because I drive away. Ethan nodded slowly, processing this. Then, to Marcus's surprise, the boy stepped forward and hugged him. It was an awkward hug, the embrace of someone who hadn't had much practice, but it was genuine. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, "for everything." Marcus hugged him back, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "You're welcome, son. You're welcome." The drive back to Tulsa was long and quiet, but for once, Marcus didn't mind the solitude. His mind was full of thoughts and memories, of Danny and Linda and Ethan and Sarah. He thought about the choices that had brought him to this point, the regrets that had haunted him for decades, and the unexpected second chance that a rainy night in Oklahoma had provided. The road stretched out before him, endless and full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus Thompson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Months passed, winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Marcus continued his routes, crisscrossing the country in his 18-wheeler, but now his trips always seemed to find their way to Denver. He would stay for a few days, sometimes a week, watching as Ethan slowly transformed from the frightened boy he had found in the truck stop into something new. It wasn't an easy transformation. There were setbacks, nights when Ethan would wake screaming from nightmares, days when he would withdraw into himself and refuse to speak. The scars on his arms faded but didn't disappear, and neither did the emotional wounds that had caused them. But Sarah and Josh were patient, providing the stability and love that Ethan had never known. The investigation into Carl was completed by the end of spring. The evidence of abuse was overwhelming, and Carl was arrested, charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and assault. Ethan had to testify, which was hard, but Marcus was there, sitting in the front row of the courtroom, a steady presence that the boy could anchor himself to. Carl was sentenced to 12 years in prison. It wasn't enough, not for what he had done, but it was something. Justice, however imperfect, had been served. By summer, the conversation had shifted from temporary fostering to something more permanent. Josh and Sarah had filed for adoption, a process that was lengthy and complicated, but filled with hope. Ethan, for his part, had started to believe that this new life might actually be real, that the other shoe wasn't about to drop. Marcus was there for the adoption hearing. He sat in the courtroom, his weathered hands folded in his lap, and watched as the judge asked Ethan if he understood what was happening. "Do you want to be adopted by Joshua and Sarah Matthews?" the judge asked. Ethan looked at Josh and Sarah, then at Marcus, then back at the judge. "Yes," he said, his voice clear and strong, "more than anything." The judge smiled and signed the papers, and just like that, Ethan Carter became Ethan Matthews. Sarah cried. Josh put his arm around his new son, and Emma and Jake cheered like their favorite sports team had won the championship. Afterward, they all went out for ice cream. Marcus watched his expanded family gathered around the table, sticky fingers and laughter, and the easy banter of people who belonged to each other. It was everything he had ever wanted for Sarah, everything he had dreamed of for himself and Linda before she got sick. Ethan caught his eye across the table and smiled. It was a real smile, full and unguarded, the smile of a boy who had found his place in the world. "Hey, Grandpa," Ethan said, and the word hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. "Can we go for a drive later? I want to see the truck." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Grandpa?" Ethan shrugged, suddenly shy. "Is that okay? I mean, you're Sarah's dad, and Sarah's my mum now, so that makes you my grandpa, right?" Marcus felt his eyes sting with tears that he didn't bother to hide. "Yeah, kid. That makes me your grandpa. And yeah, we can go for a drive later, any time you want." They finished their ice cream and headed home, the Colorado sun warm on their faces. Marcus knew he would have to leave soon, get back on the road, back to the endless highways that had been his life for so long. But for now, in this moment, he was exactly where he wanted to be. That evening, As the sun set behind the mountains, Marcus and Ethan sat on the back porch of Sarah's house, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan asked. "Anything." "That night, at the truck stop, I was thinking about giving up. I had been walking for 3 days, and I was cold and hungry and scared. I thought maybe it would be easier to just stop fighting, to let whatever was going to happen happen. And then you sat down across from me." Marcus was silent, waiting. "You saved my life," Ethan continued. "Not just from Carl, but from myself. You gave me a reason to keep going." Marcus looked at the boy who had become his grandson, at the face that still bore the traces of hardship, but now also held hope. "You saved me too," Marcus said quietly. "I've been carrying around guilt about my brother for 36 years, thinking I failed him, that I could have done something different. Meeting you, helping you, it helped me forgive myself, so we're even." Ethan smiled. "I guess we saved each other then." "I guess we did." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear. In the house behind them, Marcus could hear the sounds of his family, the clatter of dishes being washed, the laughter of children, the murmur of adult conversation. It was the sound of home, something he hadn't truly had since Linda died. "I should probably head out tomorrow," Marcus said reluctantly. "Got a load of farm equipment to pick up in Nebraska." Ethan nodded. "When will you be back?" "Couple of weeks, maybe sooner, depending on the routes." "Promise." Marcus looked at Ethan and saw not just the boy he had rescued from a truck stop, but the man he would become. A man who had learned too young that promises were often broken, that adults couldn't always be trusted, that the world was a harsh and unforgiving place. "I promise," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'll always come back." Ethan smiled, and in that smile Marcus saw the future. Not the future he had imagined for himself, the quiet retirement with Linda, the peaceful fading into old age, but a different future, one filled with purpose and connection and love. A future where the scars of the past didn't disappear but became something beautiful, something meaningful. It was a future worth driving toward. The next morning, Marcus climbed into his truck and started the engine. Sarah, Josh, Ethan, Emma, and Jake all stood on the porch to see him off. He rolled down the window and waved. "See you in a couple of weeks," he called out. "Drive safe, Dad," Sarah called back. "Be careful, Grandpa," Ethan added, and the words still sent a warm glow through Marcus's chest. He pulled away from the curb and onto the road, the truck's engine rumbling reassuringly beneath him. In the rearview mirror, he watched his family get smaller and smaller until they disappeared around a bend. The highway stretched out before him, endless and familiar. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a connection, a thread tying him to the people who mattered, no matter how many miles separated them. Marcus Thompson, trucker, grandfather, and unexpected hero, drove on into the morning sun. 3 years had passed since that rainy night in Oklahoma. The seasons had cycled through their eternal dance, bringing changes, both subtle and profound, to the lives of everyone involved. Marcus had watched from the road as his family grew and evolved, coming home whenever his routes allowed, staying longer each time. Ethan was 15 now, tall and lanky, with the awkward grace of adolescence. The scars on his arms had faded to thin white lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look. He played basketball on the junior varsity team, had a small group of close friends, and was talking about maybe becoming a lawyer like Josh, or maybe a social worker, someone who could help kids like he had been. The nightmares came less frequently now, perhaps once a month instead of every night. When they did come, Ethan had learned to talk about them, to share the darkness instead of carrying it alone. Sarah and Josh had made sure he saw a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Reynolds, who specialized in trauma, The sessions had helped, giving Ethan tools to process what he had experienced without letting it define him. Marcus had started to think about retirement. The road was harder on his body than it used to be, his back protesting after long hours in the driver's seat, his eyes straining more in the darkness. He had money saved, enough to buy a small house somewhere near Sarah, maybe take on some part-time consulting work for one of the trucking companies. The idea of settling down, of staying in one place, no longer filled him with the restless dread it once had. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when Marcus's phone rang. He was parked at a rest stop in Nebraska, eating a sandwich and watching the traffic roll by, when Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart. Dad, can you come to Denver? Soon?" Something in her voice made Marcus's chest tighten. "What's wrong? Is it Ethan?" "No, Ethan's fine. Everyone's fine. But there's something we need to talk about, something I don't want to say over the phone." Marcus was on the road within the hour, his delivery schedule forgotten. He drove through the night, pushing himself harder than he probably should have, his mind racing with possibilities. What could be so important that Sarah couldn't tell him over the phone? Was someone sick? Was there legal trouble with the adoption? He arrived in Denver just after sunrise, pulling his truck into the familiar spot at the curb outside Sarah's house. He barely had the engine off before the front door opened, and Ethan came running out. "Grandpa!" Marcus climbed down from the cab and caught the teenager in a hug. Ethan was nearly as tall as he was now, and the hug was no longer awkward but natural, the embrace of family. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, pulling back to look at Ethan's face. "Your mom sounded worried on the phone." Ethan shook his head, a strange expression on his face. "She's not worried. She's excited. We all are. But she wanted to tell you herself." They walked into the house together, and Marcus found Sarah, Josh, Emma, and Jake all gathered in the living room. They looked at him with identical expressions of barely contained excitement. "Will someone please tell me what's happening?" Marcus asked, his patience wearing thin. Sarah stepped forward and took his hands. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "Dad, sit down. There's something we need to tell you." Marcus sat, his heart pounding. Sarah sat beside him, still holding his hands. "You know how Josh and I have been talking about maybe fostering another child." Marcus nodded. It had been a topic of conversation for the past year, the idea of expanding their family, of giving another kid the chance they had given Ethan. "Well, last week we got a call from the Department of Human Services. There's a case they thought we might be interested in. A little girl named Maya. She's 8 years old." Marcus felt his breath catch. And she's Ethan's biological sister." The world seemed to stop. Marcus looked at Ethan, who was standing by the window with a complex mix of emotions on his face. "I didn't know I had a sister," Ethan said quietly. "We were separated when I was 3. I don't even remember her. But the records show we have the same mother. She's been in the system too, moved around almost as much as I was." Marcus struggled to process this information. "And you want to foster her?" Sarah nodded. "We want to adopt her eventually, give her what we gave Ethan, a real family, a real home." "But there's something else," Josh added, stepping forward. "Something that involves you, Marcus." Marcus looked at his son-in-law, waiting. "Maya's current foster situation isn't good. It's not as bad as what Ethan went through, but it's not good either. She's scared, she's withdrawn, and she doesn't trust adults. The caseworker thinks a transition might be difficult, that she might run away before she can be placed with us." "What does that have to do with me?" "Ethan had an idea," Sarah said, glancing at her adopted son. "Tell him, Ethan." Ethan moved from the window to stand in front of Marcus. "I thought maybe you could be the one to pick her up. Drive her here in the truck. It's a 2-day trip from where she is, and that would give her time to adjust, to hear about our family from someone who isn't a social worker or a foster parent, someone who knows what it's like to be rescued." Marcus stared at Ethan, understanding dawning. You want me to do for her what I did for you? Yeah. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. You're the reason I'm here, Grandpa. You're the reason I have a family. I want you to give that to Maya, too. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of his family. Sarah, who had her mother's heart. Josh, who had stepped up in ways Marcus could never have imagined. Emma and Jake, who had grown up with kindness as their baseline. And Ethan, the boy he had found in a truck stop 3 years ago, now on the verge of becoming a man. Where is she? Marcus asked. Southern California, Josh said. A town called Barstow. It's about a 16-hour drive from here. Marcus nodded slowly. He thought about what it had meant to him 3 years ago to reach out to a scared and hurting child. He thought about how that one decision had rippled outward, changing not just Ethan's life, but his own, and Sarah's, and everyone connected to them. I'll leave tomorrow, he said. Sarah hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. When she pulled back, there were tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. Marcus looked at Ethan and saw the boy smile. It was the same smile from that first ice cream trip, full and unguarded, the smile of someone who had found hope. Hey, Marcus said, what are Grandpas for? The drive to Barstow was long but uneventful. Marcus pushed through the night, his mind full of thoughts about the little girl waiting at the end of his journey. He had spoken to her caseworker on the phone, a tired-sounding woman who had given him the details of Maya's situation. Her foster family was neglectful rather than abusive, more interested in the money than the child. Maya had been there for 6 months and had made no connections, formed no attachments. She spent most of her time alone in her room, reading or staring out the window. The picture Marcus had been sent showed a small girl with dark hair and large, wary eyes. She looked like Ethan had looked 3 years ago, worn down by a world that had shown her too little kindness. He arrived in Barstow on a Wednesday morning, pulling his truck into the parking lot of a diner where the caseworker had arranged to meet him. A woman in her 40s was waiting by the door, and beside her stood a small figure with a backpack clutched to her chest. Marcus climbed down from the cab and walked toward them. The caseworker introduced herself as Susan and shook his hand. Then she stepped aside, revealing Maya fully. She was even smaller than she had looked in the picture, thin and fragile, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked up at Marcus with an expression of weary suspicion, the look of a child who had learned to expect disappointment. Hi, Maya, Marcus said, crouching down to her level. My name's Marcus. I'm going to drive you to Denver to meet your brother. Maya's eyes widened slightly at the word brother. Ethan? She whispered, as if afraid to say the name out loud. That's right. Ethan, he's been looking forward to meeting you. So has the rest of the family. Maya looked at Susan, then back at Marcus. Are you going to be my new foster dad? No, Marcus said honestly. I'm going to be your grandpa, if you'll have me. Maya studied him for a long moment, then slowly, she nodded. Okay. The drive back to Denver took 2 days. Marcus took it slow, stopping frequently, giving Maya time to adjust to the situation. She was quiet at first, barely speaking, just watching the landscape roll by through the window. But gradually, as the miles passed, and Marcus proved himself to be patient and unthreatening, she began to open up. She asked about Ethan first. What was he like? Was he nice? Did he remember her? He's the best kid I know, Marcus said. And no, he doesn't remember you. You were both so young when you were separated, but he's excited to meet you. He wanted to come along on this trip, but we thought it might be overwhelming. Maya nodded, processing this. What about the other people? She asked. The ones I'm going to live with? Sarah and Josh. They're wonderful people. They adopted Ethan 3 years ago. They have 2 other kids too, Emma and Jake. Emma's 11 and Jake's 9. You'll have a whole house full of siblings. Maya was quiet for a while after that. Marcus could see her mind working, trying to fit this information into her understanding of the world. "Why are they doing this?" she asked finally. "Taking me in." "Because it's the right thing to do. And because Ethan asked them to. He wanted you to have the same chance he had. What if I mess it up? What if they decide they don't want me?" Marcus pulled the truck over to the side of the road and put it in park. He turned to face Maya directly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you've been let down before. I know people have made you promises they didn't keep. But Sarah and Josh, they're different. They chose to adopt Ethan, and they're choosing you too. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And once they make that choice, they don't go back on it. Family is forever, do you understand?" Maya looked at him with those large, wary eyes. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I think so." "Good. Now are you hungry? There's a diner at the next exit that makes the best cherry pie in 3 states. For the first time Maya smiled. It was a small smile, barely more than a twitch of the lips. But it was real. "I like cherry pie. Then we're going to get along just fine." They arrived in Denver late the following afternoon. As Marcus pulled the truck up to the curb outside Sarah's house, he saw the whole family assembled on the porch, just as they had been for him so many times before. Sarah, Josh, Emma, Jake, and Ethan, all waiting with identical expressions of hopeful anticipation. Maya pressed her face to the window, staring at them. "That's your family," Marcus said. "Are you ready to meet them?" Maya hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Yes." They climbed down from the cab, and Marcus put a hand on Maya's shoulder as they walked toward the house. Ethan came down the steps to meet them, stopping a few feet away. Brother and sister looked at each other for the first time in 12 years. The silence stretched, filled with all the years of separation, all the pain and loneliness and fear that they had each endured alone. Then Ethan knelt down so he was at Maya's eye level, just as Marcus had done. "Hey, Maya, I'm Ethan. I know you probably don't remember me, but that's okay. We have plenty of time to get to know each other, and I promise, no matter what happens, I'm going to be here for you. Because that's what big brothers do." Maya's lower lip trembled. For a moment Marcus thought she might cry, but instead she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck, holding on tight. "I remember," she whispered, so quiet that only Ethan and Marcus could hear. "I remember you." The rest of the family descended then, gathering around in a group hug that pulled Maya into its center. Sarah was crying, Josh was grinning, Emma and Jake were bouncing with excitement, and Ethan held on to his sister like he was never going to let her go. Marcus stood a little apart, watching it all unfold. He thought about that rainy night in Oklahoma, about the scared boy with burns on his arms, about the choice he had made to get involved instead of looking away. He thought about Danny, about all the things he had lost and all the things he had found. Sarah caught his eye over the heads of her children and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Marcus nodded, his heart full. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more hurdles to overcome, more dark nights before the dawn. Maya would need time to heal, just as Ethan had. The road to becoming a family would be long and sometimes difficult. But looking at them all, tangled together on the front porch of that blue-shuttered house, Marcus knew they would make it. Because that's what families did. They held on to each other through the storms and the sunshine, through the highs and the lows, no matter what. And Marcus Thompson, trucker, grandfather, rescuer of lost children, would be there every step of the way. 5 more years passed. Marcus had finally retired, selling his rig to a young driver just starting out and buying a small house 3 blocks from Sarah and Josh. He spent his days puttering around the garden, taking the grandkids to baseball games and piano recitals, and enjoying the quiet rhythms of a life rooted in place. Ethan was 20 now, in his 2nd year of college studying social work. He had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate young man, still carrying the scars of his past, but no longer defined by them. He volunteered at a shelter for homeless youth, sharing his story with kids who reminded him of himself, showing them that things could get better. Maya had blossomed under Sarah and Josh's care. She was 13 now, a straight-A student, with a passion for art and a laugh that could light up a room. The wary, withdrawn girl Marcus had picked up in Barstow was gone, replaced by a confident teenager who knew she was loved. Emma and Jake were growing up too, each finding their own paths. Emma was heading to high school in the fall, already talking about college applications and career plans. Jake had discovered a talent for music and spent hours teaching himself to play the guitar. It was Thanksgiving when Marcus had his revelation. The whole family was gathered around the table, more people than the dining room could comfortably hold. Sarah and Josh sat at one end, Marcus at the other. The kids were squeezed in between, along with Josh's parents, who had flown in from Florida, and a few of Ethan's college friends who had nowhere else to go. The table was covered with food, turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce and green bean casserole, 3 different kinds of pie. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, the easy chatter of people who loved each other. Marcus looked around the table and felt a swell of gratitude so profound it nearly took his breath away. This was his family, this collection of people who had come together through circumstances both ordinary and extraordinary. Some were related by blood, others by law, still others by nothing more than the choice to show up and care. It was Ethan who had insisted on going around the table and sharing what everyone was thankful for. It was a tradition they had started the first Thanksgiving after his adoption, a way of acknowledging the good things in their lives. When it came to Marcus's turn, he cleared his throat and looked at the faces surrounding him. "I'm thankful for second chances," he said. "I spent a lot of years carrying around regrets, thinking about the things I should have done differently. But then I met this kid at a truck stop in Oklahoma, and everything changed. He reminded me that it's never too late to make things right. And now, sitting here, looking at all of you, I realize that every mistake I made, every wrong turn, every sleepless night on the road, it all led me here. And I wouldn't change a single thing." Ethan met his eyes across the table and smiled. "Me neither, Grandpa. Me neither." Later, after the dishes had been washed and the leftovers put away, Marcus and Ethan found themselves alone on the back porch. The night was cold, their breath visible in the air, but neither of them seemed to mind. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan asked. "You know you can. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want to do with my life." "Social work, right? That's what you're studying." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but I've been thinking about something more specific. I want to start a program, something like an outreach for kids in the foster system. A way to connect them with mentors, people who can be there for them the way you were there for me." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. I want to call it Marcus's Mile. You know, because you went the extra mile for me. Literally." Marcus laughed, surprised and touched. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You changed my life, Grandpa. This is my way of paying it forward." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Marcus thought about all the miles he had driven over the years, all the landscapes that had passed outside his window, all the people he had met and forgotten. And then he thought about this, the family he had found when he wasn't even looking, the purpose he had discovered when he thought his purpose was all used up. "You know what I've learned," Marcus said finally. "In all my years on the road." "What?" "That the journey is never really about the destination. It's about the people you meet along the way, the connections you make, the lives you touch, and the lives that touch you. I spent 23 years thinking the road was my home, but I was wrong. Home isn't a place, it's the people who make you feel like you belong." Ethan nodded, understanding in a way that only someone who had once been homeless could understand. "Thanks, Grandpa, for everything." Marcus reached over and squeezed his grandson's shoulder. "Thank you, son, for giving me a reason to keep going." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Behind them, the house was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of family. Ahead of them, the future stretched out like an open road, full of possibilities. Marcus Thompson had driven 1,000,000 miles in his lifetime, but the journey he was most proud of was the one that had led him here. It was a winter afternoon, 2 years after that Thanksgiving, when Marcus got the call. He was in his garage, tinkering with an old radio he was trying to restore, when his phone buzzed. "Marcus, this is Dr. Reeves. I have your test results." The next few hours blurred together. A trip to the hospital, conversations with specialists, Sarah and Josh arriving with fear in their eyes. The word cancer echoing in his ears like a distant thunder. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. Treatment was possible, but the prognosis wasn't good. Months, maybe a year, if the chemotherapy worked. Marcus absorbed the news with the stoicism of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by tragedy. He asked the questions that needed to be asked, made the decisions that needed to be made, and agreed to start treatment immediately. The next few months were the hardest of his life. The chemotherapy left him weak and nauseous, his body shrinking as the disease and its cure waged war inside him. But he refused to give up, not because he was afraid to die, but because he wasn't ready to leave. The family rallied around him. Sarah moved him into the guest room so she could care for him. Josh adjusted his work schedule to be home more. The kids took turns sitting with him, reading to him, playing card games, and just being present. It was Ethan who understood best. He had seen Marcus at his strongest, and now he was there for his weakness, holding his hand through the worst nights, helping him to the bathroom when he was too weak to walk alone. He never flinched, never showed disgust or pity, just steady, unwavering love. Maya painted pictures and hung them on his wall, landscapes and portraits and abstract swirls of color that made Marcus smile even when smiling hurt. Emma played her violin for him, filling the room with music that seemed to ease his pain. Jake read aloud from his favorite books, adventure stories that transported Marcus to worlds where bodies didn't betray and endings were always happy. One night, as winter gave way to spring, Marcus called Ethan into his room. The boy came immediately, sitting beside the bed and taking Marcus's thin hand in his own. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, his voice weak but clear. "What is it, Grandpa?" "I'm not going to beat this. The doctors won't say it, but I know. I can feel it." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know that. The chemo could still work. Miracles happen." "Maybe, but I've never been one to put my faith in miracles. I believe in what I can see and touch, what I can do, and right now what I can do is make sure the people I love know how I feel about them." He paused, gathering his strength. "When I found you at that truck stop, I was lost. I didn't know it at the time, but I was just going through the motions, driving from place to place without any real purpose. You gave me that purpose back. You reminded me why I was put on this earth." Ethan's tears were falling freely now, but he didn't look away. "I've watched you grow from a scared kid into an amazing man. I've seen you face your demons and come out stronger, and I know, with every fiber of my being, that you're going to do great things. Marcus Ismail, whatever else you decide to do, you're going to make a difference in this world." Marcus reached up with a shaking hand and touched Ethan's cheek. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Take care of them. Your mom, your dad, your sisters, and brother. Take care of Maya. She still has a long way to go, and she's going to need you. I will, I promise. And take care of yourself. Don't carry guilt about things you can't control." Don't let the past define your future. Live a good life, Ethan. Be happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Ethan leaned forward and hugged him, careful not to press too hard against his fragile body. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, son, more than you'll ever know." Marcus Thompson died on a Tuesday morning in late April. He went peacefully, surrounded by his family, with the sun streaming through the window and the sound of birdsong outside. He was 62 years old. The funeral was held on a bright spring day, the kind of day that seemed to mock the grief of those gathered. The church was packed with people who had known and loved him, fellow truckers who had shared the road with him, neighbors from his brief retirement, friends and family who had been touched by his kindness. Ethan gave the eulogy. He stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces and told the story of a rainy night in Oklahoma. He told them about a scared boy in a truck stop and a stranger who had chosen to care. He told them about second chances and found families, about the power of one person to change another's life. "Marcus Thompson saved me," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "He saw a kid who had given up hope and showed him that hope was still possible. He taught me what it means to be a man, to take responsibility for your actions, to help others without expecting anything in return. He taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love." He paused, looking toward the front row where Sarah, Josh, Maya, Emma, and Jake sat. "We're all here because of him. This family exists because a trucker decided to get involved, to take a risk, to care about a stranger, and I know he'd hate me saying this because he was the most humble person I ever met, but Marcus Thompson was a hero. Not the kind that wears a cape or makes the news, but the kind that matters most, the kind that changes lives one person at a time." Marcus was buried in a cemetery on the edge of town, beneath a simple headstone that read, "Marcus Thompson, husband, father, grandfather, friend. He went the extra mile." In the months that followed, the family found ways to honor his memory. Sarah started a scholarship fund for foster children in his name. Josh pro bono represented kids in the foster system who needed legal help. Maya's art was exhibited at a local gallery, with all proceeds going to homeless youth shelters. And Ethan launched Marcus's Mile. It started small, just a handful of mentors paired with kids in the foster system, but it grew quickly. Within a year, they had chapters in 3 states. Within 2 years, they were a national organization, featured in news stories and praised by child welfare advocates. Each mentor was trained in the Marcus method. Listen first, judge never, act when action is needed. Each child was treated as an individual, not a case number, not a problem to be solved, but a person deserving of respect and love and a chance at a better life. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's death, Ethan stood before a crowd of supporters at the annual Marcus's Mile Gala. The room was filled with mentors and mentees, donors and volunteers, people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that one rainy night in Oklahoma. "5 years ago, I lost my grandfather," Ethan said. "But in those 5 years, we've helped over 3,000 children find stable, loving homes. We've trained more than 1,000 mentors. We've advocated for policy changes that have improved the foster care system in 12 states, and we're just getting started." He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had committed their time and resources to helping the most vulnerable members of society. Marcus used to say that the journey isn't about the destination, it's about the people you meet along the way. Well, tonight, I want to celebrate the people, the mentors who show up week after week, rain or shine, the donors who fund our programs, the social workers who go above and beyond, and most of all, the kids. The brave, resilient, extraordinary kids who refuse to give up hope. He raised his glass. "To Marcus Thompson, the trucker who noticed something was wrong, the man who changed my life, the hero who showed us all what it means to go the extra mile." The room erupted in applause, and somewhere, somehow, Ethan was sure his grandfather was smiling. Maya was in her third year of art school when she got the news. She was sitting in her apartment in New York working on a painting when her phone rang. It was Ethan. "Hey, big brother, what's up? Are you sitting down?" Maya felt a flutter of anxiety. Those words never preceded good news. "Yeah, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Something's right, actually. Really right." "Okay, now you're scaring me. Just tell me." Ethan took a deep breath. "I just got a call from a producer in Los Angeles. They want to make a movie about Grandpa, about his story." Maya stared at her phone as if it had suddenly grown a mouth and started speaking a foreign language. "A movie? About Grandpa Marcus? Yeah, about the night he found me at the truck stop, about everything that came after. They want to call it The Extra Mile." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. It had been 8 years since Marcus died, and not a day went by that she didn't think about him. The gruff gentleman who had driven across the country to rescue her, who had shown her what it meant to have a family. "That's incredible, Ethan. He would have hated it." Ethan laughed. "I know. He would have said he didn't do anything special, that anyone would have done the same. But we both know that's not true." "No," Maya agreed. "It's not. The producer wants to meet with us. All of us. Me, you, Mom, Dad. They want to make sure they get the story right. Would you be willing to come to Denver for a few days?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I'll be on the next flight." The meeting with the producer was intense but productive. His name was David Chen, and he had a reputation for making thoughtful, character-driven films that avoided the traps of Hollywood sentimentality. He listened more than he spoke, asking questions about Marcus, about the family, about the moments that had shaped their lives. "What made Marcus special?" he asked at one point. It was Maya who answered. He saw people, really saw them. Most adults, when they look at a kid in trouble, they see a problem, a burden, something to be dealt with and moved on from. But Marcus saw the person underneath. He saw potential where others saw damage. He saw hope where others saw despair. David nodded, making notes. "And what do you want people to take away from this film?" This time it was Ethan who spoke. "That one person can make a difference. That it doesn't take a superhero to change a life. Sometimes it just takes a trucker who decides to sit down at a booth in a truck stop and ask if a kid is okay. It takes courage, yes, but mostly it takes caring, and anyone can care." The film was made over the next 2 years. The family served as consultants, making sure the details were accurate, the emotions authentic, the message clear. A young actor named Jamie Okonkwo was cast as young Ethan, and veteran character actor Robert Greene played Marcus. Both gave performances that brought the family to tears at the premiere. The Extra Mile opened to critical acclaim and commercial success. It won awards at film festivals, sparked conversations about foster care reform, and inspired countless people to reach out to the children in their communities who needed help. But for the family, the most meaningful moment came a month after the film's release. Sarah received a letter from a woman in Ohio. "Dear Mrs. Matthews," it read, "I just watched The Extra Mile with my husband. When the credits rolled, we looked at each other and knew what we had to do. We've always talked about fostering, but we've always found excuses not to. After seeing your family's story, we can't find any more excuses. We've started the process to become foster parents. I don't know if we'll ever make as big a difference as your father made, but we're going to try. Thank you for sharing his story with the world. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Sarah read the letter aloud to the family at Sunday dinner. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. "That's what it was all about," Ethan said quietly. "That's what Grandpa would have wanted. Not the movie, not the awards. Just people deciding to help." Maya raised her glass. "To Grandpa Marcus, still going the extra mile, even from beyond the grave." They laughed through their tears and drank to his memory. And somewhere, on a highway that stretched from Earth to eternity, Marcus Thompson kept on driving. The years continued to pass, as years always do. Children grew into adults, adults into elders. The world changed in ways both predictable and surprising, but some things remained constant. Every year on the anniversary of Marcus's death, the family gathered at his grave. They brought flowers and stories, memories and gratitude. They talked to him as if he could hear them, sharing the milestones and the mundane, the triumphs and the troubles. Ethan went on to become the executive director of Marcus's Mile, which eventually expanded to become an international organization with operations in 15 countries. He married a woman named Claire, a social worker he had met through the program, and they had 2 children of their own, a boy named Daniel Marcus and a girl named Linda Michelle. Maya became a successful artist, known for paintings that explored themes of family, healing, and hope. Her most famous work, a large-scale mural called The Long Road Home, was installed in the lobby of the Marcus Thompson Center for Child Welfare in Denver. It depicted a winding road leading from darkness into light, with figures at various stages of the journey, helping each other along the way. Sarah and Josh retired and traveled the world, finally taking all the trips they had postponed while raising their children. They came home to Denver for holidays and grandchildren's birthdays, their house always open, always welcoming. Emma became a doctor, specializing in pediatrics, inspired by a childhood spent watching her parents help children in need. Jake became a music teacher, passing on his love of guitar to new generations of students, and the ripples continued to spread. Each child, helped by Marcus's Mile, grew up and helped others in turn. Each family, inspired by the Extra Mile, reached out to children who needed homes. The trucker who had noticed something was wrong when a boy showed his arms had set in motion a chain of compassion that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. On what would have been Marcus's 80th birthday, the family gathered at the house Sarah and Josh had bought for their retirement. It was a sprawling ranch-style home with a wraparound porch and a view of the mountains, the kind of place Marcus would have loved. The crowd was larger than ever. Ethan and Claire with their kids, Maya with her partner, a sculptor named James, Emma and her husband, both doctors at the same hospital, Jake and his wife, surrounded by their 3 children, Sarah and Josh, grey-haired now but still spry, hosting the gathering as they had hosted so many others over the years. After dinner, they went outside to watch the sunset over the Rockies. The sky turned pink and orange and gold, and for a moment, everyone was silent, lost in their own memories. It was Daniel, Ethan's 10-year-old son, who broke the silence. "Daddy, tell me about great-grandpa Marcus again." Ethan lifted his son onto his knee and looked out at the mountains. "Well, it started on a rainy night in Oklahoma. Great-grandpa was a truck driver, and he had stopped at a truck stop to get out of the storm. And there, sitting in a booth all by himself, was a scared little boy who needed help. But most people, they would have walked on by. They would have told themselves it wasn't their problem, that someone else would take care of it. But great-grandpa wasn't most people. What did he do?" Ethan smiled, the same smile his grandfather had smiled all those years ago. He sat down. He asked if the boy was okay, and that one simple act, that choice to care about a stranger, changed everything. Daniel's eyes were wide. "And the boy was you?" "The boy was me." The sunset deepened, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn sounded, a long, low note that seemed to echo across the mountains. Ethan held his son close and looked up at the sky. "Thanks, Grandpa," he whispered, "for everything." And somewhere, on a highway that had no beginning and no end, Marcus Thompson kept on driving, carrying hope and healing to all the lost children of the world, 1 mile at a time. The story ended, but its echoes continued. In every act of kindness, in every outstretched hand, in every moment when someone chose to see a person instead of a problem. Marcus Thompson's legacy lived on, not in monuments or movies, but in the hearts of all those he had touched. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how far we drive, but who we pick up along the way. Not how long we live, but how deeply we love. Not what we leave behind, but what we carry forward. The road goes ever on, and the journey never truly ends. It just finds new travelers to carry it forward.